Good afternoon. Welcome to the Analyst. Today we'll be taking up 7 newspaper articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express and discussing them. The handout for the same will be available in the description of this video for your kind perusal. Please have a look at that. The first article that we'll be taking up is related to persons with disabilities, as the Supreme Court has ruled that accessibility for the disabled persons is a fundamental right. The second article is related to cybersecurity, as a DOPT report has highlighted that a crucial defense unit was affected by a ransomware attack last year. Additionally, we'll be taking up 5 topics in the simplified also, which will be helpful for the prelims as well as mains preparation. The first article is related to the persons with disabilities. The context behind it is that the Supreme Court has ruled that accessibility for the disabled persons is a fundamental right. So we will discuss the rights of the persons with disabilities, the constitutional and legal provisions, what role has the judiciary played in safeguarding their rights, what are the challenges that the persons with disabilities face, and what are some of the initiatives. This is important in GS2 under the topic welfare schemes for vulnerable sections of the population and the performance of these schemes and mechanisms, laws, institutions and bodies constituted for the protection and betterment of these vulnerable sections. Now let's start with some basics first. How are the persons with disabilities defined? How is this term defined? We have borrowed the definition from the United Nations Convention, the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It defines the persons with disabilities as those persons who are suffering from long-term physical, mental, intellectual or sensory impairments. The impairments or disabilities which hinder their full and effective participation in the society on an equal basis with the others. The same definition has been adopted by the Statute Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016. Additionally, this act also defines the persons with benchmark disability. This term has been defined in the statute as the persons who are suffering from a disability, a specific disability of more than 40%, then it is considered as a benchmark disability and the person is said to be a person with a benchmark disability. When we look at the data related to the persons with disabilities in India, as per the census 2011, there are more than 26 million persons with disabilities in India and they constitute about 2.21% of India's population. And 69% of the disabled persons in India reside in the rural areas. When we look at their employment, as per the 76th round of the National Sample Survey conducted in 2018, only 23.8%, that is less than 1/4 of the disabled persons in India are employed. Whereas if you look at the national average, the labor force participation rate is more than 50%. Now, what is the constitutional and the legal framework regarding the rights of the disabled in India? Constitutionally, their rights are safeguarded under Articles 14, 16, 41 and 46. Article 14 guarantees the right to equality, ensures the equal protection by the laws for all individuals in India. And under Article 16, there is also provided the equal opportunity for the participation in government jobs, and reservation is also provided for utilizing the provision under Article 16. Article 41 provides for the right to work, education and public assistance. That is, this is a directive principle whereby the government is enjoined upon to ensure that the old age, sick, disabled also are able to enjoy their right to work, right to education and right to public assistance. Under Article 46, the government is required to promote the educational and economic interests of the weaker sections in the society, and it includes the interests of the disabled persons also. Legally, their rights are safeguarded by various statutes. The important statute is Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016. This statute increased the number of disabilities which are taken into account. Earlier, 7 disabilities were officially considered. Now, this act has increased the number of disabilities to 21 disabilities which are recognized by the government. And it has provided for increase in the reservation for the persons with disabilities. This reservation increase has been done in both the government jobs as well as in higher education. Earlier, the reservation for the persons with disabilities in the government jobs was 3%. Now it has been increased to 4%. Whereas in the higher education, their reservation has been increased from 3% to 5%. Likewise, this statute also provides for the right to free education for the persons with disabilities who are from the age of 6 years to 18 years of age. The statute also provides that the government will ensure the accessibility for the persons with disabilities in the public buildings, public institutions, etc. And it provides for the constitution of special courts. The special courts will be conducting the trial of the cases involving the persons with disabilities, and it prescribes for the penalties also. If an offense is committed against a person with disability, then it provides for specific penalties. Additionally, we have the statute Mental Health Act 2017, which provides for the care and upliftment and betterment of the persons with mental sickness. Additionally, the Rehabilitation Council of India Act provides for the registration of the qualified professionals, and it coordinates and improves the services which are provided for the rehabilitation of the persons with disabilities in India. Now, what has been the role played by the judiciary for the betterment of the persons with disabilities? One was the recent case of Nipun Malhotra versus Sony Pictures. This is famously known as the Aankh Micholi case. In this case, the court said that there should be no usage of derogatory language against the persons with disabilities. The usage of words like cripple, spastic, etc., they perpetuate the discrimination that the disabled already face. It should not be used, and there should be no stereotyping of the disabled in the media, in the films, etc. This was related to the Aankh Micholi movie, and the court observed that they should not be portrayed as a marginalized community. Additionally, there are several cases regarding the reservation of the persons with disabilities in government jobs. In Indira Sahni versus Union of India case, the landmark ruling on reservation, the court said that the disabled should also be provided reservation as a horizontal reservation under Article 16 subclause 1, that is, the persons with disabilities, whether they are belonging to the general category or to the reserved caste, etc., they should be provided 3% reservation across the caste, that is horizontal reservation, and this is irrespective of the 50% ceiling which is usually observed in the reservations by the court. In the Government of India versus Ravi Prakash Gupta case in 2010, the court said that the reservation which is provided to the persons with disabilities, it should be provided at all stages of employment. That is, including in promotions also, not only in the initial appointment, and it should be provided in all government jobs, including the jobs of the civil service level. In Union of India versus the National Federation of the Blind case, it is a landmark ruling again in favor of the persons with disabilities. The court said that the government should identify the posts. The government should identify the posts which are suitable for employing the persons with disabilities and ensure the effective implementation of the reservation in their favor. In Vikas Kumar versus UPSC case in 2021, the court said that the principle of equality and non-discrimination must be upheld, and therefore the disabled should get extra time in competitive exams and all necessary facilities to ensure their effective participation in the competitive exams should be ensured by the authorities. Now, what are the challenges that the persons with disabilities face in India? They are often victims of social stigma. They are often marginalized, they are looked down upon, they are victims of pity, People even consider that their disabilities are a result of their sins in the previous birth. All these are misnomers, and they are not able to effectively participate in the education also. For example, less than 1% of the educational institutions in India are having disabled friendly infrastructure. Likewise, they do not get enough access to the healthcare. For example, there are barriers in the form of communication barriers that the blind, the deaf face in terms of communicating their health problems. There are financial barriers, there are physical barriers that they face in accessing the healthcare. Likewise, they face issues in employment. About 5 companies out of the 50 companies in the Nifty 50, that is the top 50 in India, have more than 1% persons with disabilities on their payroll, and most of them are government sector companies. Likewise, the implementation of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act has not been up to the mark. And additionally, the persons with disabilities face the loss of identity and dignity, and therefore they are not able to enjoy a life with dignity. Now, what are the welfare measures? What are the initiatives that the government has taken to ensure their betterment? One, the government has come up with the Accessible India campaign. In the Accessible India campaign, there is the provision to ensure that the built-up environment is provided for, and they have the disabled friendly infrastructure, a transport ecosystem where they are able to access the transport easily, it is wheelchair friendly and they are able to access it, and there is the provision of information communication technology within the ecosystem. There is the Deen Dayal Disabled Rehabilitation Scheme also, which the government has come up with. In this scheme, the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations, they are provided with financial assistance by the government to ensure that they can work for the upliftment and betterment of the persons with disabilities. And additionally, there is the assistance to disabled persons for purchase of aids and appliances. That is, the government gives subsidies to ensure that the disabled are able to purchase the medical aids to assist them in living a dignified life. There is the National Institute of Mental Health Rehabilitation, which also works in this regard. Now, what can be the way forward to ensure their upliftment? One, we need to improve the sensitization in the society. For example, the usage of simple words like Divyang instead of Viklang can also go a long way. The society needs to be sensitive towards them. We can ensure adoption of more preventive measures to ensure that the temporary disabilities are not converted into permanent disabilities. For example, we can ensure the effective implementation of comprehensive newborn scheme under the Rashtriya Bal Swasthya Karyakram. We can come up with ideas like disabled budgeting. For example, we have the gender budgeting concept. So for this, the public policy framework itself needs to evolve. The assessment criteria for the assessment of the disability among the persons with disabilities can also be evolved. Right now, we assess the disability in terms of medical percentages. For example, a person is 30% disabled, 50% disabled. Rather than this, we can evolve the assessment criteria by taking into account the functional limitations rather than the medical percentages to determine the extent of disability of the person. Likewise, we can also consider the psychosocial disabilities also apart from the physical disabilities to ensure their effective participation. Now, there is a means practice question also. Discuss the key challenges encountered by the persons with disabilities in terms of accessibility, employment, social inclusion, and analyze the role of judiciary in safeguarding their rights. Also shed light on the initiatives taken by the government to improve their quality of life. Please try to write it. Now, the next article is related to cybersecurity. The context behind it is that the annual report of the Department of Personnel Training has highlighted that a crucial defense unit suffered from a ransomware attack last year. So we will discuss the cybersecurity challenges that India faces, the institutional architecture in India to counter the cybersecurity threats, and a few suggestions as well. This is important in GS3 under the topic Basics of Cybersecurity. Now let's start with some basics. Joseph Nye categorizes the cyber threats under four headers: cyber espionage, cyber crimes, cyber attacks, and cyber war. The cyber espionage is akin to intruding into the computers to steal information. Usually, this information is sold to known state actors, to other countries, essentially to extract some money. Then there are the cyber crimes, which may be in the form of electronic frauds, for example, stealing credit card information, etc. And then there are the cyber attacks. These attacks are to interrupt the digital services or systems, for example, DDoS attacks, the distributed denial of service, etc. And then there is the cyber war. The cyber war is a large scale digital attack. Usually this attack is on critical infrastructure. Now these cyber threats have also evolved over a period of time. We can observe that they have become more sophisticated over a period of time. We can observe this with the help of a graph. For example, their sophistication levels have increased with time. In the early 2000s, for example, there used to be cyber attacks using viruses. The websites were targeted, there was hacking of websites, there was the use of Trojans, etc. Then in the 2000s, there was the usage of DDoS, distributed denial of service. It was essentially attacking a website by overloading it with traffic, using botnets, using bots and computers, etc. And now the situation is such that it has become even more sophisticated, and it is in the form of social engineering, phishing, etc. Now, some common cyber threats and risks that the financial industry faces include phishing. In phishing, usually a mail is sent by the attacker and it contains some malicious programs that you are supposed to download and install, and then your data will be stolen. And there is the social engineering. In social engineering, usually the cyber attacker tries to gain your confidence, and once you trust him, then he tries to extract sensitive information and personal data from you. There are the usage of malwares or malicious softwares, ransomware attacks, DDoS, insider threats. That is when a person who is part of an organization himself tries to gain unauthorized access to sensitive information and he tries to sell it then. And there are third-party risks as well as the installation of potentially unwanted programs in the computer systems and APTs, that is advanced persistent threats. Usually the advanced persistent threats are those when an unauthorized user gains access to unauthorized sensitive information and it remains undetected for long periods of time. Now, what are the challenges that India faces in terms of cybersecurity threats? One, there has been an increase in the number of cyber attacks. In the pandemic year, in the times of COVID-19, the number of cyber attacks in India increased by more than 500% as compared to the previous year. And as per a report, India suffered a loss of more than 1 lakh crore within a year in 2020 itself. And there was an increase in the ransomware attacks also. The cyber attacks, they leave the critical infrastructure vulnerable. Not only in India but abroad also. For example, in Ukraine, the electronic systems which were attached to the warheads, they were rendered unusable, practically unusable because of the cyber attacks by the hackers, because of GPS jamming, etc. Also, there was an attack on the critical infrastructure in Iran. For example, the Iranian nuclear program was targeted by Stuxnet in 2010. Likewise, the banking system and the digital services in the Europe, Australia and America, it was targeted through Petya. It was another ransomware. India also has a problem of underpreparedness. Usually, to ensure cybersecurity, the CERT in Computer Emergency Response Team issues guidelines in India. But most of the organizations in India, they lack preparedness. They face a scarcity of the professionals as well as the scarcity of the resources to counter the cybersecurity threats. Likewise, there is a limited private sector participation in the innovation, in the R&D, in the cybersecurity sector. Likewise, in the present times, there is an added complexity due to the layers of complexity introduced by artificial intelligence. by machine learning, by the adoption of newer techniques like data analytics, cloud computing, Internet of Things, techno-legal issues, etc. They are adding to the complexity of the architecture. Plus the adoption of newer technologies like 5G and quantum computing, they have increased the potency of the malicious softwares and they are able to target. The financial vulnerability is also often there because of the targeting of the SWIFT system, the system that is used by banks to update the payments, etc. by the hackers, and the personal data also becomes vulnerable. The right to privacy, there are often the breaches of the personal data, and such sensitive personal data including financial information is often sold on the dark web also. Now, what is the institutional architecture in India related to cybersecurity? At the apex, there is the National Security Council Secretariat. This is the apex agency. Under this works the National Cybersecurity Coordinator, who coordinates the information related to cybersecurity threats and their management. Then there is the National Information Board. The National Information Board is headed by the National Security Advisor. Then the National Cyber Coordination Center, it has been established by the Computer Emergency Response Team and it functions under the National Information Board. The purpose of the National Cyber Coordination Center is to ensure the prevention of the cyber crimes and to come up with the prevention strategy, to take up investigation training and to review the outdated laws and to suggest for their updation in the cybersecurity structure. The National Crisis Management Committee also deals with the cybersecurity threats. This is headed by the Cabinet Secretary, and the Computer Emergency Response Team overall monitors the cyberspace in India. It detects the alerts, it coordinates with the various other agencies and gives warnings and provides for the detection of the cybersecurity threats. The National Critical Infrastructure Information Protection Center works under the National Technical Research Organization. It was established in 2014 and also works in the same domain. There is the establishment of the Indian Cybercrime Coordination Center, which collates the data and coordinates with the agencies. And there are some newer initiatives also, including the recent Cyber Surakshit Bharat initiative, which is to spread the awareness about cybercrime and for building of capacity to ensure that there is enough capacity to tackle the cybersecurity threats. There is the establishment of Cyber Swachhta Kendra. This is for the internet users to encourage them to clean their computers and to remove the potentially dangerous and unwanted programs, etc. But there are certain problems in this institutional architecture. It needs restructuring. Why? Because the cybersecurity ecosystem in India, it is fragmented. It is fragmented because the individual ministries, they have their own cybersecurity units. For example, the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, Ministry of Home Affairs, Ministry of Defense, National Technical Research Organization, all of them have their own cybersecurity units. And there is the additional specialized units also, including the Computer Emergency Response Team and the Indian Cybercrime Coordination Center. Therefore, there is no unified agency, and because of this absence of a unified agency, India is not able to participate effectively in the global cybersecurity framework as well. There are additionally the laws related to cybersecurity in India. It is governed under the archaic India Information Technology Act 2000. This also needs updation. There is a need for a specific statute, and there is the National Cybersecurity Policy 2013, which again needs updation. Now, what are the suggestions for the improvement of cybersecurity framework in India? One, we need to come up with a statute, a specific law targeting the cybersecurity situation in India, rather than it being governed under the broad Information Technology Act 2000, which also needs updation. We can recommend setting up of an agency, a unified agency which can collate the information collected from the various units which are independently set up by various ministries. It will also enable India in effectively framing a cybersecurity strategy also, because there is the need for the national cybersecurity strategy. It needs to be put in place, and there need to be standard operating procedures to deal with the upcoming cybersecurity threats. We can put in place a code of ethics also for ensuring that the cybersecurity threats are dealt with ethically and effectively. We can go for the development of offensive capabilities. Offensive capabilities means that we should also be able to target the computer systems, the cyber security framework of the hackers themselves. It will create a deterrence, and we will also be able to develop softwares to intercept attacks that way, as we will be able to think the way hackers think. We can go for innovative techniques like air gapping. Air gapping essentially means that the critical infrastructure, the computers which are connected to it, they are not directly connected to the internet also. Rather, they are offline, and if any data or any communication is to be fed into the computers which are connected to the critical infrastructures, they are fed through pen drives, hard drives, etc. Thus, a gap is maintained between the computers connected to critical infrastructure and the internet. Likewise, we can develop the technologies in the big data analytics and cloud computing abilities, so that we are not dependent upon the other countries for borrowing the cloud computing capabilities and making our data vulnerable to threats there. And we can go for the international cooperation as well. There is a mains practice question also. Discuss the major cybersecurity challenges faced by India, the existing institutional framework for addressing these issues, and suggest measures to strengthen the country's cybersecurity posture. Please try to write it. Now, the next article is related to MSMEs. This is important in GS3 under the topic Indian economy and issues related to planning, mobilization of resources, growth, development, and employment. This is important as two articles appeared in the Hindu as well as the Indian Express regarding the suggestions of the finance minister related to the initiatives taken up for the MSMEs, the micro, small and medium enterprises. So let's start with some basics. The definition of MSMEs, the micro, small and medium enterprises, was updated in 2020. The new definition came into effect from the July 1, 2020. Now the micro enterprises are considered as those enterprises who have a turnover of 5 crore rupees and an investment in plant and equipment machinery of less than 1 crore rupees. The small enterprises have a turnover of up to 50 crore rupees and their investment in plant and machinery is more than 1 crore but less than 10 crore rupees. The medium enterprises are considered as those enterprises who have a turnover of 250 crores and their investment in plant and machinery is more than 10 crore but less than 50 crores. Now, why is the government promoting the MSMEs? Why are they significant? Because they are considered to be the growth engines for the Indian economy, because their contribution to the GDP in India is significant. As of 2020-2021, the contribution to the gross value added to the GVA in India of the MSMEs is about 27%, which is significant. Likewise, they contribute significantly to exports. As of 2022, their contribution to exports is 42%. And the more exports India does, the more India is able to earn the forex reserves. They are also important in rural development, as about 50% of the MSMEs are in the rural areas. Likewise, they are significant for employment, as they employ the largest number of people outside the agriculture sector. Likewise, they are significant in the social inclusion also. As per a ministry report itself, about 2/3 of the MSMEs are owned by socially backward classes. Therefore, they are significant in social inclusion and they are important for promoting innovation, entrepreneurship, etc. also. Now, what are some of the initiatives that the government has taken up for the promotion of MSMEs? First, let's look at the initiatives in the recent budget itself. In the budget, it was announced by the government that a new mechanism will be put in place for facilitating the continuation of bank credit to the MSMEs during their stress period. That is, when the MSMEs are not able to repay their bank loans, they are going through financial stress. At that time, a new mechanism will be put in place to ensure that the bank credit continues and the MSMEs continue enjoying the financial liquidity at that stage. Likewise, the Mudra loans. The Mudra provides for loans to the MSMEs, the Tarun, Shishu and Kishore loans. That has been increased from 10 lakh to 20 lakh rupees to ensure more credit availability and liquidity. Likewise, the turnover threshold of the buyers for mandatory onboarding on the TREDS platform will be reduced from 500 crore to 250 crores. The TREDS platform ensures that the MSMEs are able to have the working capital by converting their receivables into cash. Likewise, the government has guaranteed financial support for 50 multi-product food irradiation units in the MSME sector, essentially to promote this sector. And the e-commerce export hubs will also be set up in PPP mode to enable MSMEs and traditional artisans to sell their products in the international markets. Apart from these, also there have been some initiatives which have been continuing. For example, the Prime Minister's Employment Generation Program, which also supports the MSMEs, and the credit linked capital subsidy scheme, in which the credit which is given to the MSMEs, it is also subsidized. There is the establishment of a trust fund also to ensure that the credit availability for the medium and small enterprises is not hampered, and there is a specific program, that is the RAMP program, for raising and accelerating the MSME's performance. There is the Aspire program. Aspire program is to encourage the innovation and entrepreneurship among the MSMEs. And there is the Sfurti program. Sfurti program is the scheme for fund upgradation for the regeneration of the traditional industries, to promote the traditional industries. The government also provides for financial support for the ZED certification, that is zero effect, zero defect, to improve the quality output from the MSMEs. Likewise, the government has come up with various programs to increase the digitalization, to increase the adoption of digitalization among the MSMEs. For example, Digital Saksham, Udyam scheme, eShram portal, etc., to increase the adoption of digitization. Now let's come to the article. The Finance Minister has encouraged the regional rural banks and the sponsor banks to develop products which are suitable and which align with the MSME clusters to further raise the banking penetration and financial inclusion. And this outreach should be done by the regional rural banks in areas specifically textile, wooden furniture, leather, food processing, packing materials, engineering and machine tools. As per the Finance Minister, these areas hold immense potential, and here the loan portfolio of the regional rural banks to the MSMEs can easily be increased. Also, the Finance Minister highlighted that among the 5 announcements made in this budget for the MSMEs, which we already discussed, the government will be giving the 100 crore credit guarantee scheme in front of the Union Cabinet for its approval. And this was a grievance for a long time, that the MSMEs can get the working capital from the banks, but they don't get the term loans. Now there will be a guarantee which will be provided under this credit guarantee scheme, and the government will give the guarantee power of 100 crore rupees. And for this, the public sector banks will be developing a new credit assessment model. Now, the next article is related to the illegal immigration of Indians into USA. This is important in GS2 under the topic Effect of Politics and Policies of Developed and Developing Countries on India's Interests and Indian Diaspora. Now, why have Indians been trying to enter into USA illegally? Why undocumented migration? Essentially, there are both push factors and pull factors. For example, ever since the times of the pandemic, there has been a rise in the global migration. The global migration has been increasing ever since the pandemic. Plus, there has been a mushrooming of the travel agencies in India. The travel agencies, they are largely unregulated in India, and they have been attracting the innocent, the pliable people and sending them abroad through illegal routes, donkey routes. For example, they are encouraging people to take the route through West Asia to Africa to Europe, then to Latin America, and then crossing the border from Mexico into USA illegally. And the smugglers now have been using sophisticated routes also. Also, there are some of the pull factors as well, because when people apply for visas for entry into USA, there is a large backlog, and it takes quite a few months, rather years, for their visas to be approved. And at the same time, there is an easier route which is available, that is the unguarded Canadian border. Rather than the heavily guarded US-Mexico border, there has been an infiltration, illegal immigration into USA through the soft, porous Canadian border. Also, the Latin American countries and some Central American countries like Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, they are known to provide visa-free entry to US visa-holding Indians, and through the porous borders, they are able to smuggle people through the borders into USA. Plus, India has a large number of agreements for visas with these countries that allow for extended stays for Indian citizens. For example, Peru. Peru is among those countries that waives visa requirement for Indian nationals for business and tourism purposes for up to 180 days per year. And the number of Indians who are trying to enter the US has increased a fivefold increase since 2019. Now, what is the lawful immigration route into USA? USA every year in the every US fiscal year from 1st October to 30th September issues about 1,40,000 employment visas, the H-1B visas that they call, and they divide them into 5 preference categories. The first 3 preference categories for inviting the skilled professionals into USA are for the persons who have extraordinary ability in science, arts, business, athletics, outstanding professors, researchers, etc. The fourth category is for certain special immigrants, that is the professionals who work with media, broadcast media in USA, and certain employees or former employees of the US government. The fifth preference category is for the investors, that is there a person who can potentially launch a foreign commercial enterprise in the USA? Now, what has been the policy stance of the Trump government? In the first stint, that is when President Trump was in power from 2017 to 2021, the policy stance was rather hard. The rate of denial of the H-1B visas from 2017 to 2021 came down. The Trump government at the time also had the slogan, Buy American and Hire American. He even signed an executive order regarding this at that time. And the Trump government even gave the slogan, Build the Wall. That is, they wanted to even more tighten the borders between USA and Mexico and build a wall all along the US-Mexico border. Now, what can be the probable future stance? What do the experts predict? One, the Trump government has suggested that there can be deportation by the National Guards for the people who have illegally entered into USA or who have overstayed than what is legally permissible. They will be deported. And there might even be the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act by President Trump. But there is an issue that this policy of President Trump may clash with the economic policy of the tech giants, because the tech czars in USA, they want to access the Indian market also. Now, the next article is related to the exodus of foreign investors from India. This is important in GS3 under the topic Indian economy and issues related to planning, mobilization of resources, growth, development, and employment. Now, of late, there has been an exodus of the foreign investors from India. The foreign institutional investors, they have pulled out money in the month of October from India. What are the reasons behind this exit? One of the reasons which is being projected is the stimulus which is given by China. China has been easing its monetary policy. The government spending in China has increased. Therefore, there is a potential of higher returns in China. Hence, some of the foreign institutional investors have withdrawn money from India, and probably in order to enter into the Chinese market, because the foreign institutional investors, they are always in the search of higher returns. Another reason can be the premium valuation. The value of the Indian stocks, it is rather overvalued and it is being sold at a premium right now. And there is a high inflation also. The inflation data in September projects the inflation to be 5.49%, which is quite high. And high inflation in turn makes the availability of goods and services expensive. It reduces the purchasing power of the citizens. And if the purchasing power reduces, there will be lesser consumption. In turn, it will reduce the corporate profits. And when the corporate profits come down, therefore the foreign investors will flee. And as per the second quarter of the fiscal year 25, the earnings have come down. The net profit growth has come down to 3.6% only. Also, the bond yields in the US market, that has increased. They have become more attractive investment options as it is a safe investment option also. Another factor is the US elections. The US elections, just before that, the investors wanted to get away from the uncertainty. There was an uncertainty in the global markets at that time. And as per the Dalal Street experts, it may remain volatile in the short term because of the exodus of the foreign institutional investors from the Indian market. But as of now, the domestic institutional investors, they continue to exert confidence in the Indian stock market. And the domestic institutional investors, they have rather pumped in the money, and there has been a steady buying from the domestic institutional investors, and it has kept the market buoyant despite the outflows of the foreign institutional investors. The structural nature of these investments, which include retirement assets, will not lead to the selling by the domestic institutional investors in the medium term, and this current corrections, they are rather an opportunity to buy. Now, the global factors are rather more stronger determinants, as the article also observes that in the China there has been a stimulus package including reduced reserve requirements, lower mortgage rates and direct borrowing access for the institutional investors from the People's Bank of China. Now, what will be the impact of this exodus of the foreign institutional investors from the Indian market on the Indian stock market? One, it may be more volatile. This volatility will remain in the short term, but over the medium term, it will become again stable. And there will be a downward pressure. Downward pressure on the stock prices as there is a broader sell-off by the foreign institutional investors. And it might even lead to the currency depreciation. The rupee will depreciate. Why? Because the foreign institutional investors, when they are selling, they will be converting their Indian rupees into dollars before they repatriate. Therefore, the demand for dollars will increase and hence the rupee will depreciate. It may lead to reduced liquidity because the domestic institutional investors have already pumped in the money they had, and the domestic sentiment may rather be adversely impacted. Thus, an opposite trend may be noted here. On the one side, the foreign institutional investors, they are withdrawing money, but on the other side, the domestic institutional investors, they have become the net buyers. Therefore, there is a divergence in the sentiments of the two broad investment categories. The next article is related to Forest Rights Act. This is important in GS3 under the topic environment. The Ministry of Tribal Affairs has directed the government of Maharashtra to ensure that nobody is forcefully evicted from the Tadoba Andheri Reserve. Now, before coming to the article, let's discuss the core provisions of the Forest Rights Act 2006. This act provides for the rights of the forest dwellers. It provides that the tenure of the forest dwellers, it is secured. The tenure security over the forest land is provided if the occupation has been from prior to December 13, 2005. This act also provides for the recognition of community rights. That is, the community has the common rights over the forest and the forest products. It also provides that there should be the protection and conservation of the community forest resources. It provides for conversion of all forest villages and habitations located inside the forest land into revenue villages. And it provides, rather than for relocation, It provides for in situ rehabilitation of the displaced persons who have been evicted without compensation prior to the December 13, 2005. It recognizes the ancestral domain right, that is the habitat right if their ancestors had been living there, to PVTGs, the particularly vulnerable tribal groups. The FRA also provides that the nomadic, the pastoral and the semi-pastoral communities, they should have seasonal access because they are nomads, they have herds and they need grazing grounds. They should have seasonal access over the forest lands. And the act also provides that the leases which have been granted, they should be converted by the erstwhile government zamindars into permanent land records to ensure that the pattas can also be granted accordingly. Essentially, this act provides that the rights of the forest dwellers, they should not be hurt, they should not be violated, they should not be taken away. Now coming back to the article, it says that certain complaints were received from the families residing in the Tadoba Andheri Reserve that there was non-recognition of forest rights and forced eviction. It was raised by the families residing inside the core areas of the Tiger Reserve. It was alleged that the forest department was forcing them to evict. Now, this was in the violation of the provisions of Forest Rights Act, Wildlife Protection Act as well as the SC/ST Act. And the families had earlier filed claims under the Forest Act in 2010, but they were still pending. And when they were decided, in some cases rejected, then the appeals are still pending. So therefore, the Ministry of Tribal Affairs has pointed out to the Maharashtra government that the Forest Rights Act recognizes the rights of the scheduled tribes and the forest dwelling communities to occupy the forest land, including the tiger reserves. This is recognized under the statute and they should not be forcefully evicted. The act stipulates that no one from the STs or forest dwelling communities should be evicted without due recognition and verification of the rights. Even under Wildlife Protection Act also, the tribal communities and forest dwellers inside the national parks and tiger reserves can be relocated only after obtaining their consent, the informed consent from the Gram Sabha, and after establishing that if there is human presence in that core area, it will be hurting the wildlife. Now, the next article is related to the blacklisting of Indian firms by USA. This is important in GS2 under the topic Effect of Politics and Policies of Developed and Developing Countries on India's Interest. Now, the US Treasury had taken the decision to impose sanctions on 19 Indian entities and among nearly 400 companies, mainly because they were supplying dual-use technologies to Russia. Also, the US Commerce Department had also added 40 companies, including 5 from India, for re-exporting goods and parts to Russia. That is, some companies were importing goods from USA and then again exporting them to Russia. Essentially, the chief objective behind such sanctions was to ensure that the sanctions imposed upon Russia, they are effectively implemented and they are not bypassed, and therefore the companies or the countries who are helping Russia or cooperating with Russia, they are being punished through such sanctions. Now, why are these recent sanctions significant? Because in 2021, the US President of the time, Joe Biden, had signed an executive order, that is blocking property with respect to specified harmful foreign activities of the government of the Russian Federation. Under this order, the US had sanctioned the hundreds of companies for more than 20 countries worldwide for supplies and sales to Russia. Now, these sanctions will be harming the companies as the assets or the funds that the companies hold in USA, they will be frozen, and plus the executives of the companies, they might also be facing travel bans. So how has the Indian government responded? The Ministry of External Affairs has only observed that they have seen reports of US sanctions, but they have not commented. The ministry said the companies were not in violation of the Indian laws, and it pointed out that the government is trying to clarify the issues. Additionally, India has a robust legal and regulatory framework on strategic trade and non-proliferation controls. Therefore, it highlights that India is a member of the non-proliferation treaties, including the Wassenaar Arrangement, Australia Group, missile control, technology control regime, etc. And we are adhering to the norms of these groups. So what can India do? India does not recognize the unilateral sanctions that are imposed by the USA or any other country. We adhere to the sanctions which are imposed by the United Nations only. And therefore, the MEA has observed that the Indian agencies are sensitizing the Indian companies that the new measures are being implemented by USA and they could impact them. Therefore, the government could also increase the measures to sanction-proof those Indian companies doing business with Russia by building our own mechanisms. For example, by building more structural banking mechanisms and facilitating payments in national currencies. Such measures have already been put in place for oil, for refineries procuring Russian oil, diamond processing units and other sectors where the US and EU sanctions upon Russia have been more stringent. Therefore, the payments can be in rupees rather than dollars. But eventually, rejecting the US decision to impose sanctions unilaterally, it will have a cost on the bilateral ties. The government will have to evaluate the cost benefit calculus here and whether we should accept the US sanctions or we should react more strongly to these sanctions. Now, another factor which comes into picture is the election of Donald Trump as president. The US administration, after the election of Donald Trump, is expected to pursue a softer line on Russia, as it is unlikely that the sanctions will be removed soon. But the US Congress has frequently taken very tough positions on Russia. For example, in 2017, it had also forced Trump to sign the CAATSA, Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act. CAATSA was essentially imposed on the countries who were purchasing military equipments from Russia, threatened sanctions against countries for procuring Russian military hardware, including the S-400 missile defense system that India has also signed a deal for. So India will have to tread this path cautiously. Thank you.